Why is there an 8-foot goat-headed statue with 2 children staring right up at it in front of a US state capitol building? Some say it's a symbol of Satan, but almost no one knows what it actually means. Its name is Baphomet, and for centuries this name has been whispered in fear, erased from history, and branded as evil. But Baphomet isn't the devil. In fact, it could hold the key to unlocking your power. Because behind the horns, the torch, and all the controversy lies a truth so extreme the church tried to burn it out of existence. We're gonna trace the full forbidden story of Baphomet, from secret societies and tortured confessions to occult resurrection and political revolution. And by the end, you'll understand why this ancient symbol terrifies those in control, but most importantly, how it can allow you to access your inner power. Let's begin. I want you to imagine Europe in the early 1300s. This is the time of the Knights Templar, basically medieval Navy SEALs, but celibate and in chainmail. The Knights Templar protected Christians traveling to the Holy Land and fought in crusades. But these guys, they had some secrets. Publicly, they built massive fortresses and became incredibly wealthy, and get this, they even created an early version of international banking. But their wealth and power made rulers nervous. See, they answered only to the Pope, not to kings, which made them a state within a state. But here's where things get mysterious, because their initiation rites were highly secret. So secret, in fact, that when King Philip IV of France began cracking down on them, he accused them of blasphemy. See, in 1307, King Philip decides, screw it, let's arrest them all. And dozens of Templars were arrested in what was basically like a medieval SWAT raid. But it didn't stop there, because the Knights Templar are tortured and pressured to confess to outrageous crimes. We're talking the worst sins the church could imagine, like spitting on the cross, black magic, and worshiping a strange god called Baphomet. Okay, so what is Baphomet? Well, funny you should ask, because the Inquisition didn't know either. Their interrogators were out there screaming, "Tell us about Baphomet," while having no clue who or what it even was. Now, while the Templars were being tortured, some of them coughed up some wild descriptions. One said that Baphomet was a head, maybe even a severed head, even a head with 3 faces. Another said it was a strange cat figure, while others denied any knowledge of it at all. The accounts contradicted each other wildly. But remember, they were being tortured, and so these terrified prisoners might have just made stuff up to end their suffering. You'd probably say anything too if someone was yanking out your toenails in the name of Jesus. See, there was very likely another motivation to all this: money. King Philip desperately wanted to destroy the Templars because he owed them a lot of cash. And what better way to get out of paying your spiritual credit card bill than accusing your creditors of devil worship? Basically, when in doubt, scream heretic, and then hope everyone's too afraid to ask any follow-up questions. In other words, let's just say they weren't given their due process. Now, when I first started speaking out about hidden knowledge, I lost people, friends, family, and hey, check the comments to see all the people freaking out and calling me a heretic and a devil worshiper. People fear what they don't understand. But was there any truth to the Templars' forced confessions? Many historians believe that the Templars were probably innocent of the charges, or at least that Baphomet was a misinterpretation. Some scholars think that Baphomet was simply a medieval French way of saying Mohammed, aka Muhammad, implying the Templars had adopted secret Islamic practices. Remember, the Templars had spent time in the Middle East, and to their enemies, it wasn't a stretch to claim that they'd been seduced into worshipping the heathen prophet of Islam. But other scholars think that Baphomet could come from Arabic, maybe Abu Fiamat, meaning father of understanding, which could have been a name for some wisdom figure the Templars admired. So naturally, if the church heard that, they would have said, burn it, because nothing terrifies organized religion more than people trying to understand things. And so Baphomet became the ultimate scapegoat, literally. Now look, it's easy to write off Baphomet as just a medieval game of guess that heresy, but could it have some truth to it or something more? Because some of those tortured ramblings were strangely specific, like a 3-headed face that could grant wealth and make your crops grow. Could it be the Templars really did have a secret ritual involving a mystical head? Perhaps not a demon per se, but something symbolically important to them? Maybe during their holy unholy tourist adventures in the Middle East and war crimes, the Templars might have stumbled onto forbidden wisdom, some esoteric download from the ancient world. See, there are tons of legends suggesting that they discovered secret scrolls from Solomon's time, ancient rituals or magic, the Holy Grail, or even the Ark of the Covenant, or esoteric knowledge tied to Kabbalah, Hermeticism, or Egyptian mystery schools. Some theorists say that that's why they became so powerful, so secretive, and eventually targeted. They weren't just bankers and warriors, they had knowledge that threatened the church. Now, this is speculation and legend, of course, but whatever the truth, the Baphomet scandal gave the Templars a black eye they never recovered from. In 1314, the Templars' Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake, reportedly shouting through the flames that God would avenge them. And guess what day it was? Friday the 13th. Some say this is the origin of our superstition around Friday the 13th being unlucky. The Knights Templar may have died, but Baphomet certainly didn't. For centuries, Baphomet remained a mystery, a whisper of a dark secret tied to the Knights and perhaps to lost ancient knowledge. But now fast forward to the 19th century. The age of enlightenment and reason has come and mostly gone, and a new wave of fascination with magic and the occult is sweeping Europe. The occult is in, esotericism is trending, spiritual influencers are growing long beards and drawing pentagrams in their notebooks. And one man in particular is about to resurrect Baphomet from the ashes and redefine it for the world. So imagine it's Paris in 1854, in a dimly lit study cluttered with books on magic, angels, demons, and alchemy. Kind of like my apartment, to be honest. But here sits Elephus Levi, a former Catholic deacon turned into a full-time occult scholar and part-time heretic. And he's about to draw an image that will haunt imaginations for the next 170 years. Levi names it Baphomet. The drawing, often called the Sabbatic Goat, is now the iconic image most people associate with Baphomet. If you've ever seen a demonic goat illustration on a heavy metal album or in a horror movie, you've basically seen Levi's Baphomet, a goat-headed, breasted, winged hermaphrodite entity. So what was Levi thinking? Was he trying to freak everyone out? Well, maybe, but this wasn't a Hail Satan moment. He created this image as a statement about unity, not evil. The occult philosopher Manly P. Hall wrote, "The Baphomet is not a devil, but a symbol of divine wisdom, the perfect equilibrium of opposites." I remember being told that Baphomet was literally the devil, but when I started digging into the truth, I realized everything I'd been told was a lie, and that this symbol was something a lot more powerful. According to Levi, every detail of Baphomet has a deep meaning, so let's decode some of it now. The goat's head represents our animal nature, the raw and fearsome aspects of existence. The human body represents our ability to reason, but Levi also gave his Baphomet a pair of female breasts and also a masculine posture and frame. This androgyny was very much intentional. It symbolizes the union of opposites, male and female in one being, meaning that divinity transcends gender. One hand points up, the other down. As Levi explains, this is the ancient hermetic gesture of as above, so below. It's saying that what is in the spiritual is reflected in the material. One hand points to a white moon, the other to a black moon, symbolizing the unity of light and dark, higher and lower. Right on Baphomet's forehead is a 5-pointed star, 1 point up. This is not an inverted pentagram, it's an upright one. The inverted pentagram generally means matter over spirit, but the upright one means spirit over matter. So right on Baphomet's head, we have a symbol of enlightenment and the ability to master our animal nature. Translation, your higher self is in charge, not your horny lizard brain. The torch between the horns represents intelligence or the divine light. Levi wrote, "The flame of intelligence shining between his horns is the magic light of the universal balance, the image of the soul elevated above matter." Then written on Baphomet's arms are the words solve and coagula, meaning to dissolve and coagulate, basically to break apart and to bring back together. This is a reference to alchemy, the process of transformation. See, alchemists believe you had to break substances down to purify them and then recombine them into something new. But Levi is implying a spiritual alchemy. Break yourself down unite your dualities and you can transform into something greater. Between the legs, instead of genitals, Levi erects something else, a staff with two serpents. Now this stands for reconciliation of opposites and life force. It rises where the seed and uterus would be, again hinting at the union of male and female forces, giving birth to spiritual life. And then we have Baphomet's wings, which are like angels, representing the celestial, divine nature of this being. Elevation, rising above to enlightenment. Okay, as you can see, Levi packed a lot into one drawing. Far from saying, hey, here's a picture of the devil, Levi was saying, behold the symbol of the entire universe. He described Baphomet as the absolute in symbolic form. To him, it wasn't an idol to worship, but a collection of symbols to contemplate. And this channel isn't just about decoding ancient symbols, but about activating the God within you. It's about waking up the world. The key idea that Levi hammered over and over is equilibrium. In his own words, this figure was meant to represent the equilibrium of opposites. Every element, light and dark, human and animal, male and female, above and below, spiritual and material, is balanced in Baphomet to point towards an underlying unity of all things. The whole thing is like a giant yin-yang symbol in goat form. Now, this concept is huge because when I was younger, I felt like I had to choose to be rational or mystical or one thing or the other. But the more that I studied and explored, I realized true power comes from becoming whole. It gets even more interesting when we consider why Levi was so fixated on this equilibrium. Remember, this was mid-19th century France. Big ideas were in the air. Revolutions had rocked Europe a few years earlier. Science was charging forward. Traditional religion was being questioned. And Levi himself was caught up in the political and spiritual zeitgeist of the time. Before he became Elephus Levi, his name was Alphonse Louis Constant, and he had flirted with socialist and utopian movements in the 1840s. He saw hope in new ideas that could free humanity from tyranny and ignorance. Levi wrote that Baphomet expresses the perfect harmony of mercy with justice. Believe it or not, Levi saw Baphomet as a sign of that hope. In his writings, Levi hints that throughout history, there was a secret thread of true wisdom, the true religion, behind all religions, passed down by initiates like the Gnostics, the Templars, and others. And this hidden truth was about balance and unity, not the strict one-sided dogma that the church pushed. He believed that Baphomet stood for a future ideal society where science, reason, and religion were reconciled and human freedom reigned. Yeah, that same goatish figure that would later be vilified as a satanic icon was in the mind of its creator a beacon of liberty and enlightenment. The torch between Baphomet's horns, that light of universal balance, is a direct reference to this idea. And if you believe that people deserve to hear about real hidden wisdom and not fear-based dogma, then like and subscribe and help spread this information to help wake up the world. Because hey, this is not just a channel, it's a revolution in consciousness. Also, check out my books on inner transformation. Links are in the description of this video. All right, at this point you might be wondering, did Levi actually think the medieval Templars had a goat idol like this? Was he claiming his Baphomet drawing was the one that the Templars worshipped? The answer, not exactly. Levi seemed to have believed that the Templars, if they had a Baphomet at all, were misunderstood. That perhaps their Baphomet wasn't a literal devil, but a symbol of deeper knowledge. He wrote, with a bit of tongue-in-cheek defiance towards the church, that all the inferior initiates of the occult sciences always adore what is signified by this alarming symbol. He was basically daring the church by saying, yeah, occultists did and do revere what Baphomet stands for, so what? For Levi to publish this bizarre goat-headed figure and flat out claim it represents the true divine equilibrium and hint that the church got it wrong was like lighting a stick of dynamite in the social discourse of his time. Unsurprisingly, many outside occult circles just saw a scary devil idol and freaked out. The term Baphomet started leaking into popular culture as something inherently diabolical. But within occult circles, Levi's Baphomet became revered, a sort of banner of hidden knowledge. But here's where things get really interesting. Some researchers believe that the word Baphomet is actually a coded message, a cipher about a goddess? All right, get this. One theory proposed by Dr. Hugh Schonfield Schofield, who was a scholar that worked on the Dead Sea Scrolls, he suggested that Baphomet was not gibberish, but was a word deliberately constructed using the Atbash cipher. Now, the Atbash cipher is a simple substitution code used in some ancient Hebrew texts, where you basically reverse the alphabet. Schofield took the name Baphomet, transliterated it into Hebrew letters, and then applied the Atbash cipher. What did he get? Sophia. Yeah, Sophia. You see, that's the Greek word for wisdom, but it's more than just a word. In Gnostic traditions, Sophia is also the name of the goddess of wisdom, a female divine figure who essentially represents the wisdom of the source of existence itself, and she's considered to be infinitely more powerful than the God of the Bible. So if this cipher theory is true, then Baphomet equals wisdom, and not just any wisdom, but the Sophia. So could it be that the Templars, or whoever coined Baphomet, had in mind the goddess of wisdom all along? If they were influenced by Gnostic ideas, they may have chosen a code name for Sophia to keep things secret from the church. After all, worshipping a female goddess, especially one considered more powerful than the God of the Bible, would definitely count as heresy in those days. Now keep in mind, the idea that the Templars actually meant that Baphomet was code for Sophia is speculative, and most mainstream historians don't accept it as fact. But the idea has caught the imagination of many people. See, we started with torture and devil worship accusations, and now we're talking about goddess wisdom hidden in a goat idol. Does this rabbit hole get any deeper? Yeah, a lot. Okay, so long before the Templars or Levi, there were the Gnostics of the early centuries CE. They were sects that blended elements of Christianity and Greek philosophy and ancient pagan ideas into a kind of mystical stew. They were the ones who worshipped Sophia, but there was another god they worshipped, a deity named Abraxas. If you think Baphomet looks weird, wait until you hear about Abraxas. Abraxas was typically depicted with the head of a rooster, the body of a man, and instead of legs, two serpents. In its hands, it might hold a shield and a whip. Abraxas was the supreme being, essentially above both God and the devil. But just like Baphomet, Abraxas was a union of opposites too. In some interpretations, Abraxas encompasses both good and evil because it's above duality, controlling both light and dark aspects of reality. Sound familiar? That's because this is basically the exact concept Levi was trying to convey with Baphomet, something that reconciles and contains all opposites. Think about the deep similarities here. Abraxas has the head of an animal, just like Baphomet. Both have a human torso. Both have twin serpents representing duality. And the whip and shield Abraxas holds represents defense and offense. In other words, duality again. Later thinkers, like the famous psychologist Carl Jung, were fascinated by Abraxas, seeing it as a symbol of the union of opposites in the psyche. Jung said, "The self then functions as a union of opposites and thus constitutes the most immediate experience of the divine." And guess what? Carl Jung even wrote a book about Abraxas called The Seven Sermons to the Dead. In it, he writes, "Abraxas begetteth truth and lying, good and evil, light and darkness in the same word and in the same act." If you want me to do a video about that book, tell me in the comments. But even if there's not a direct connection between Abraxas and Baphomet, the resemblance and concept is pretty crazy. More importantly, what this suggests is that the idea of a supreme being representing the synthesis of everything, matter and spirit, male and female, light and dark, is something that's popped up in various forms throughout history. It's like humanity keeps coughing up this symbol in different costumes. Baphomet is one costume, Abraxas was another. Now, I did a whole video about Abraxas, so check that out. But hold on, okay, the rooster head for Abraxas makes symbolic sense. It stands for the dawn of a new day. In other words, enlightenment. But when it comes to Baphomet, why a goat? Seriously, out of all the animals that could have been combined into this symbol of wisdom and balance, now we end up with a goat's head? If you ask a medieval Christian, the answer is easy. Goats were linked to the devil because they're associated with lust, stubbornness, and the damned goats separated from the sheep in the biblical day of judgment. But the real story here is older. Meet Pan, the Greek god of the wild. Pan was a nature deity, half man, half goat. Pan wasn't a devil though. though. He was playful and lustful, a god who loved to even play the flute. And he embodied the untamed, carefree spirit of nature and fertility. However, to the later Christian mindset, a nude, horny, in both senses, pagan god was a little too reminiscent of what they imagined Satan to be. Early Christian art and propaganda essentially took elements of Pan, horns, goat legs, the mischievous smile, and grafted them onto their depictions of Satan. Over time, the image of a goat-like devil was cemented in the popular imagination. So part of Baphomet's visual DNA goes all the way back to Pan. The irony is that Pan wasn't considered evil by pagans at all. He was even loved, though also a bit feared for his unpredictable nature. Our word panic comes from Pan, who could cause a sudden fear. So in a way, when Levi drew Baphomet, he was reclaiming the goat from pure demonization, blending the Pan-like form with even more symbolism to say something new. But we're not done with the goats, because Levi explicitly connected Baphomet with the Goat of Mendys. What the hell is that, you ask? Well, Mendys was the Greek name for an ancient Egyptian city, and the people of Mendys worshipped a ram or goat deity. By name-dropping the Goat of Mendys, Elephus Levi wasn't just showing off his ancient Egyptian trivia points, he was poking a big flaming stick right into the church's prudish, holy backside. The Goat of Mendys was tied to rumors of ancient goat worship cults in Egypt, rituals soaked in fertility, sex, and raw life force. You know, all the good stuff the church slapped a do not touch label on and buried under 12 levels of guilt. Levi looked at the primal goat energy and said, yeah, this isn't evil, this is divine equilibrium. Meanwhile, the church was over in the corner screaming, sex is from Satan, put your genitals away. Because in the church's eternal fear of anything fun, sexuality equals demonic. Now, in medieval witch lore, the devil was often said to appear at witches' Sabbaths as a black goat, or goat-like figure in general, sometimes even called the Goat of Mendys in later retellings. And get this, witches were even accused of kissing the devil's goat butt. Seriously, they called it the osculum infame. I don't know, stories were weird back then. But Levi, the occult detective, thought this was all completely misunderstood. He believed that these wild, witchy tales were distorted, and that they were echoes of ancient pagan fertility rituals. You know, the kind where people danced naked in forests and celebrated nature instead of condemning it. He thought the stories of goats with candles between their horns weren't some satanic fever dream, but folk memories of the ancient nature god, illuminated and torch-bearing. So Levi doubled down and slapped that flaming candle right between Baphomet's horns like a divine headlamp. It wasn't the devil, it was the divine light of nature. The church wanted sin, and Levi gave them symbolism on fire. Because what Levi was basically saying was, hey, you know all those heretics and witches you've been burning for centuries? Yeah, they were onto something sacred. You just don't get it. By reclaiming the goat, Levi and those after him were basically reclaiming the idea that nature and the flesh are both part of the divine. That's a very different attitude from mainstream Christianity, which traditionally taught that the flesh is corrupt and nature, especially human nature, is full of sin. Baphomet says, stop demonizing the very things that make you alive. Embrace the paradox. Be both beast and angel. Be sacred and sensual. But you might be thinking, how did Baphomet become equated with Satan himself? How did he get slapped onto pentagrams, tossed into horror movies, and plastered onto band tees at Hot Topic? Simple. Enter 20th century Satanists. They saw the goat, the boobs, the vibes, and said, let's scare the hell out of everyone with this. And honestly, mission accomplished. All right, now strap in and crank up the Black Sabbath, because we're heading to 1960s America, a time of hippies, LSD, free love, and a national identity crisis wrapped in tie-dye. And who enters the picture? Anton LaVey. Imagine if a James Bond villain and a Vegas magician had a baby who read Nietzsche and got really into Halloween. That's LaVey. He had a shaved head, goatee, even wore a cape and horns on occasion, but his whole attitude towards the church was, your God sucks and I'm throwing a party about it. In 1966, while the rest of the world was singing about peace and flowers, LaVey founded the Church of Satan, which sounds terrifying until you realize it was less about blood sacrifices and more about dramatic atheism with eyeliner. Because here's the kicker, LaVey didn't actually believe in Satan. He was an atheist, but he did believe in trolling Christianity so hard it got whiplash. To him, Satan wasn't wasn't a literal horned being roasting sinners in hell. It was a symbol, a sexy, rebellious middle finger to every priest, preacher, and pearl clutcher in power. LeVay said, "We don't worship Satan, we worship ourselves, using the metaphorical representation of the qualities of Satan." For LeVay, Satan wasn't an actual being, but a symbol that represented indulgence, individualism, and doing what you want. So obviously, LeVay needed a logo, something with bite, and what did he choose? Baphomet. But this wasn't the full torch-headed titties-out version. He picked an image from an 1897 occult book, and it was a goat's head that perfectly fit inside an inverted pentagram. It was edgy and screamed definitely not welcome at Bible camp. LeVay called it the sigil of Baphomet. LeVay's sigil had it all. Goat head, 5-pointed star pointed down, which represented the power of flesh over spirit, and to top it off, the Hebrew letters spelling Leviathan around it. It was bold, edgy, and had Baphomet right in the name. So now, thanks to LeVay and his infernal marketing skills, Baphomet, once a symbol of mystical unity and sacred transcendence, was now the official face of modern Satanism. The goat had gone full shock rock star. From that moment on, Baphomet wasn't just a mystical symbol with a torch between its horns. Now it was the devil's Instagram profile pic. Every time the Church of Satan made headlines, the world saw that iconic goat pentagram. Never mind that LeVay knew the occult history was way more nuanced, but he wanted to freak out the church, so he was perfectly happy to shout "Hail Satan" under the Baphomet banner and let people think he literally meant it. He once wrote, referring to the church's fear of Pan, "It required little changeover to transform the horns and cloven hooves of Pan into the most convincing devil." And he happily took advantage of their fear. Now, the sigil of Baphomet was on the cover of the Satanic Bible. Literally. Baphomet had been officially owned by the dark side in the public imagination. But here's the plot twist that would make a fundamentalist's head spin. Even LeVay's Satanists didn't actually believe Baphomet or Satan was real. They didn't worship it. To them, Baphomet, or Satan, was a symbol, a fiery middle finger to the face of Christian moralism, a way of saying, you say it's evil? Cool, we'll take it. Now watch us throw a better party. But good luck explaining that to your Midwestern dad after he finds your goat pentagram necklace and thinks you're about to sacrifice the family dog. See, during the 1980s, people feared the heavy metal album covers and Dungeons and Dragons manuals that had the pentagram. What started as a symbol of sacred balance had become the ultimate icon of rebellion. Since the Church of Satan called their symbol the sigil of Baphomet, Baphomet equaled Satan in most people's heads. But there's someone else who's part of this story, and he's considered by many to be even more sinister than Anton LaVey. He's been known as the wickedest man in the world and called himself the Great Beast 666. That man was Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley was perhaps the only person who loved shocking the establishment more than Anton LaVey. But Crowley came decades earlier, around the turn of the 20th century, and his approach was steeped in esoteric knowledge. Where LaVey played the role of satanic high priest as a sort of satire, Crowley sincerely delved into magic and styled himself a prophet of a new age. And wouldn't you know it, Baphomet played a role in Crowley's life and philosophy. First off, Crowley adopted the name Baphomet as his own magical title when he took leadership in a secret society known as Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO, around 1912. Crowley said, "I had taken the name Baphomet as my motto in the OTO." In these secret societies, it's customary to take on a motto or name to signify your spiritual identity. Crowley chose Baphomet as his. That alone tells us he identified strongly with what Baphomet represented. Keep in mind, Crowley was very familiar with Levi's work. He greatly admired him, even believed he might be Levi's reincarnation. So he didn't see Baphomet as just some evil symbol for shock value. He fully understood Baphomet as the symbol of the great work, which is the union of opposites. Crowley called Baphomet the hieroglyph of arcane perfection, a divine androgyny that reconciles the spiritual and the physical. This is classic classic Hermetic teaching, very much in line with Levi. But Crowley goes further into the territory of sex magic. One of Crowley's big contributions in the OTO and Thelema was the idea of using sexual energy in magical ritual. He saw the sexual act and the fluids involved as containing tremendous power. In this context, Crowley linked Baphomet to the generative power of sex. He wrote that Baphomet is the spirit of the sperm. It's the vital force that is released in the sex act, and also the magical child that is produced from the union. Okay, what the hell does all that mean? Keep in mind, this is symbolic. The magical child is spiritual intention being born. Now, this might seem bizarre. Baphomet is sperm? But consider the logic here. If Baphomet is about the union of opposites, the moment of climax in sexual union is literally when male and female fluids combine to potentially create new life, the child. Now again, don't get it twisted. He's not talking about an actual baby here. The magical child is a symbol that represents the new creation, the result of love or union guided by will. Purpose. The symbolic magical child could be a spell, an idea, a personal transformation, even a new version of you. This was his way of integrating Baphomet into the core idea of his philosophy. Love is the law, love under will. Here, love equals union, connection, polarities merging, and will equals the soul's true purpose, divine intention. So for Crowley, sex wasn't dirty, it was sacred and symbolic. Crowley believed that it was the ultimate symbol for the union of opposites, positive and negative, light and dark, matter and spirit. And what's Baphomet all about? Union. Balance, creation through opposites. Crowley even ritualized this. In his version of the Mass, the Gnostic Mass of the OTO, there's a part where participants declare belief in the serpent and the lion, mystery of mysteries in his name, Baphomet. So the serpent and lion are Thelemic code for the divine feminine and masculine energies. Serpent representing the Kundalini or divine feminine, lion representing the solar masculine. Their union is called a mystery of mysteries and is named Baphomet. But remember, this is symbolic. It doesn't have to do with gender the way we think about it in our culture today. In plain language, they're saying we believe in the union of opposites, the secret of divinity, and we call that Baphomet. So Crowley ensured that Baphomet was firmly in the toolkit of esoteric practitioners, not as a satanic scare, but as a positive symbol of the great work, the union of opposites. All right, now let's fast forward to today, because the Satanic Temple is about to enter the chat. Now, the Satanic Temple is absolutely not the same as LaVeyan Satanism, even though they still get lumped together by confused soccer moms and cable news anchors. LaVeyan Satanism was founded by Anton LaVey in the 60s. It's about individualism, ritual, and dramatic atheism with flair. But the Satanic Temple was founded in 2013, and it's like if the ACLU and a heavy metal band had a baby. Let me explain. The Satanic Temple is a non-theistic religious organization, meaning they don't believe in any literal gods or devils, but they see Satan as a symbol for resistance, and they exist to fight for bodily autonomy, free expression, and the separation of church and state. They've become a major thorn in the side of religious fundamentalists, not by casting spells, but by knowing the Constitution better than the Bible thumpers. So what do they actually do? They sue people, like a lot. If a state passes a new law based on a religious bias, they file lawsuits faster than you can say unconstitutional. They also fight for reproductive rights. The Satanic Temple considers bodily autonomy a sacred value, and they've gone head to horn with anti-abortion legislation across the United States, framing reproductive choice as part of their religious freedom. They also troll with purpose. If a city allows a nativity scene, let's say, on public property, they'll demand to put up their own satanic holiday display. Not because they want to ruin Christmas, but because equality means everyone gets a seat at the table, even the ones wearing horns. They even protect students. Their after-school Satan Club might sound scary, but it's a real program that exists to balance out evangelical Christian groups targeting kids in public schools. It's not about indoctrination, it's about making space for critical thinking and pluralism. And no, they don't sacrifice animals, they don't curse their enemies, and they definitely don't believe in hell, except maybe the DMV. They're basically about fighting for freedom, especially against modern religious hypocrisy. So what do they have to do with Baphomet? Well, the Satanic Temple brought Baphomet Baphomet back into the spotlight as a giant literal statue. We're talking about an 8-foot tall, 3,000-pound bronze monument featuring Baphomet seated on a throne and 2 children standing beside him looking up in awe. And for a handful of hours, they even put it right in front of the state capitol in Arkansas. See, several states in the US, like Arkansas and Oklahoma, they started putting up 10 Commandment monuments on government property. That's a big no-no if you believe in the actual separation of church and state, since it clearly favors one religion over others. So the Satanic Temple responded with a simple challenge. If you allow one religion to put up a monument on public grounds, then you have to allow ours too. And that's when they unveiled the Baphomet statue. The Satanic Temple doesn't even want the statue up everywhere. They just want it up wherever religion is being used to dominate the public space. The founder of the Satanic Temple said, "We have as little interest in forcing our beliefs and symbols upon you as we do in having the beliefs of others forced upon us." Their message is real simple. If you're gonna make government property religious, then it has to be religiously inclusive. And if you don't want Baphomet next to the 10 Commandments, great, then take both down. What started as a misunderstood medieval myth has become a 21st century icon of freedom, balance, rebellion, and equal rights. He's not here to damn your soul. He's here to remind you that liberty means liberty for everyone. So what is Baphomet? We've certainly seen that the answer isn't simple, but one thing is certain: Baphomet is not the devil, at least not in the way most people think. In fact, Baphomet might be said to represent the opposite of the Christian Satan in a key sense. Satan, in Christian lore, is the personification of pure evil, opposed to God, split off from the divine light. Baphomet, in occult understanding, is all about uniting, not splitting. It's about healing the rift between spirit and matter, male and female, heaven and earth. Baphomet doesn't take sides. Baphomet is the side that says both sides belong together. No wonder Baphomet has been so vilified. An idea that radical, that God and the devil could be two halves of the same whole? In a sense, Baphomet was a devil to the established church, but not because it was an actual demon from hell. It was a devil because it represented knowledge and balance that challenged the church's authority. It invited people to think for themselves and to reconcile opposites internally. Baphomet lets us see unity where others see division. In a world that's very painfully polarized into us versus them, spirit versus science, male versus female, Baphomet's lesson of equilibrium is more relevant than ever. And let's be real, in a world obsessed with cramming everything into little boxes labeled this or that, Baphomet says, why not both? Why not neither? Why not something more? People see the breasts and the goat head, the male and female traits, and they panic because Baphomet doesn't play by the binary rules. But that's the whole point. Baphomet isn't saying you have to choose between opposites. He's saying the division itself is an illusion. The truth isn't either or, it's both and, or something entirely outside the system we've been handed. And that's why Baphomet still scares people, not because it's evil, but because it's free. All the wars that we fight out there, the culture wars, the gender wars, the spiritual wars, they're all just projections of the war inside of us as individuals. We're not just one thing. We're light and shadow, reason and passion, masculine and feminine, order and chaos. But we've been taught to cut ourselves in half. Baphomet says, bring them back together. Because when you heal the split within you, you stop needing to fight it externally. That's the real great work. That's the hidden wisdom. And that's what Baphomet was pointing to this whole time. This movement is about healing the collective by healing ourselves. And if this resonates with you, you're part of something bigger now. But if you're ready to go even deeper, then watch my video on Abrais, the forgotten god, worshipped by heretical Christians, who's more powerful than God and the devil combined. It'll change the way you see everything.